climatique et l'appauvrissement de la biodiversité en empêchant la consommation dans l'Union européenne de produits qui viennent de ces terres déboisées, par exemple cacao, café, huile de palme, soja, bois, caoutchouc ou charbon de bois. Donc sur ces points, intéressant à noter, une conférence de presse du rapporteur Christoph Hansen est prévue mercredi à 14h30. Moving to foreign affairs to continue, I attract your attention on Tuesday morning. There will be a key debate devoted to EU policy towards China. This is a debate expected to address a wide range of issues related to EU-Beijing relations, and MEPs are expected to call for a coherent EU approach. On foreign affairs to continue, a second item I want to highlight on Wednesday morning, the MEPs will exchange on the recent decision of the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants against Russia President Vladimir Putin and his Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, for the alleged war crimes of deporting and allegedly transferring Ukrainian children for occupied regions of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Migration poursuivre. Lundi, au début de la session, la présidente Metsola devrait annoncer les mandats de négociation pour débuter les négociations avec le Conseil sur la réforme du régime d'asile de l'Union européenne et les mesures qui facilitent la migration légale. Donc fin mars, il y avait eu différentes décisions prises en commission liberté civile du Parlement européen. Il y avait 4 rapports législatifs qui avaient été adoptés sur les nouvelles procédures de sélection, les règles sur l'asile, sur la gestion des migrations, les réponses aux crises, mais aussi 2 propositions sur les questions de migration légale, le permis de travail et de séjour et le statut de résident de longue durée pour les ressortissants de pays tiers. Donc ça, c'est un mandat qui sera annoncé. S'il y a des objections, à ce moment-là, il y aura un vote prévu jeudi sur ce mandat. Autre annonce de mandat qui est prévue, une sur les négociations qui devraient s'ouvrir sur le paquet de lutte contre le blanchiment d'argent et aussi pour pouvoir commencer les négociations, autre mandat encore, sur une loi pour améliorer la labellisation des produits et lutter contre le greenwashing. Donc différents mandats et entrées en négociation qui seront prévus. Durant cette session, les députés devraient aussi approuver des premières règles de l'Union européenne pour garantir la traçabilité des transferts de cryptoactifs ou de crypto-monnaies, ainsi qu'un cadre commun pour surveiller et protéger, pour surveiller ces marchés cryptoactifs et protéger les consommateurs. Donc c'est 2 textes qui ont été négociés avec le Conseil, une part pour tracer les crypto-monnaies et pouvoir bloquer les transactions suspectes pour prévenir le blanchiment d'argent, le financement du terrorisme et d'autres infractions, et d'autre part pour garantir contre des manipulations de marché ou la criminalité financière. Voilà. To conclude, I'd like to point out that MEPs will also share their first reactions on Tuesday afternoon to the expected Commission's new cyber package proposal. It will be presented directly after the college in plenary at 3. And then another important moment, Luxembourg's Prime Minister Xavier Bettel will appear before the Parliament for the 9th debate of This is Europe series. It's on Wednesday at 10:30. Note that there will be a press briefing prior to the debate in plenary, so between the President Metsola and Prime Minister Bettel at 10:20. So that's to say it's a very packed plenary, but I'm sure the groups will add their own priorities. So I'll start giving the floor to EPP. Pedro.
Merci Delphine. Quel soulagement, parce qu'avant de venir dans ce podium, je disais, comme est-ce qu'on dit Fit for 55, que c'est le plus grand sujet de la session en français. Et j'étais soulagé quand tu as dit Fit for 55. Donc, ça doit être comme les week-ends. Et en français, on dit Fit for 55. Bon, seulement, je vous prends 10 secondes pour vous dire que pour le groupe PP, les sujets prioritaires de la session, à part les Fit for 55, ça va être le débat sur la politique qui doit suivre l'Union européenne vis-à-vis de la Chine. Je crois que c'est le sujet le plus important parce que autour des tensions en Taïwan, on ne veut pas que le Taïwan devienne l'Ukraine de l'Asie. Et donc c'est pour ça qu'on a poussé à ce débat. Manfred Weber, le président du groupe, sera notre orateur principal. C'est pour cela qu'il ne pourra pas, parce qu'il n'a pas encore cette condition démocratique d'être à plusieurs endroits au même moment. Il ne sera pas à la conférence de presse, mais on sera tous là-bas, prêts à répondre à vos questions, et lui aussi, pendant la semaine. Et si vous avez des questions sur la position de mon groupe vis-à-vis d'autres dossiers de la plénière, je les attends pour tout à l'heure, dans un souci de breveté. Merci beaucoup.
C'est particulièrement bref, mais n'hésitez pas à revenir avec vos questions. Pour le groupe SND, Yann Bernas.
Hello everyone. I want to try this time to be more brief than Pedro, but I think it will be complicated. So but okay, let's move on. So hope you had a great Easter break. First of all, please remember that our president, Irache Garcia Perez, will have her press conference, the usual press conference, on Tuesday at 3:30 and not at 10 as usual. She will intervene during the debate on China. The purpose of this debate for us is to try to push the EU and the member states to forge a united position and a coherent position towards China. We cannot consider China as a threat or as a problem as such, but rather as a part of the solution. Our group is, of course, very much concerned about the critical issue of human rights in China, as well as the problems and the wind of war blowing over Taiwan. We expect China to be responsible and respect the status quo, refraining from any military action in or around Taiwan. As from the European side, we all know that we suffer from an unbalanced trade relation with China, and this must be fixed. Let me just say on the recent polemics that division within the EU can only weaken our interests, common interests. And the message that we want to deliver next week is that we must certainly keep an open but vigilant dialogue with Beijing, possibly speaking with a united European voice. Then, of course, the other big elephant in the room is the Fit for 55 package. I think we kept our promises to citizens to deliver on climate change by adopting the major and, let's say, the most important files within this mandate. After very complicated and long negotiation, we raise the initial ambitions on the EU climate goals in a way that is both feasible for industries, sector and for everyone. The ETS, I mean, we don't need to get back on this, but will make the EU industry pay more for the pollution they cause, pushing them to invest further in decarbonization. It's very important that also maritime sector will start chip in and enter in ETS. The same for ETS for aviation. That will now increase incentives and decarbonize possibly faster. CBAM, of course, it's very important because it will give the EU the possibility to protect our industries from the unfair competition created by third countries that do not comply with our environmental standards. And last but not least, for us very important, is the Social Climate Fund that will somehow support vulnerable households and workers impacted by the green transition so that nobody can be left behind. I will close here and, of course, happy to answer to your question in case. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think now for Renew, Clara de Mello.
Merci beaucoup Delphine. Bonjour à tous. Merci de participer une autre fois au pre-briefing pour vous présenter nos priorités pour la prochaine session plénière. Nous voudrions souligner 3 priorités. Tout d'abord, le débat sur la décriminalisation universelle de l'homosexualité en Ouganda et aussi partout. C'est un débat qu'on a demandé et qui viendra avec une résolution aussi. Deuxièmement, le débat sur la nécessité d'une stratégie cohérente pour les relations de l'Union européenne et la Chine. Et enfin, le débat sur les enfants expulsés des forces de l'Ukraine. So first of all, on the debate on the LGBTIQ rights in Uganda and globally, this debate will take place on Wednesday. And we ask for this debate because, as you well know, the newly adopted Ugandan law imposing up to 20 years in prison for people identified as LGBTIQ and even making some cases punishable by death is one of the world's harshest anti-gay laws. So we think the EU must respond not only to this case, because sadly we had other cases before, and I'm afraid we'll have some cases coming, sadly, but also to the backlash on LGBTIQ people's rights elsewhere around the globe. So we ask for this debate, and as said, we will table a resolution calling for universal protection of LGBTIQ rights, including the decriminalization of homosexuality globally. The second point we want to highlight is the debate on the need for a coherent strategy for EU-China relations. This will take place on Tuesday, and we pushed for this debate as well. We think the EU needs a coherent strategy concerning the relations with China, and we think the approach shall be based on dialogue when it comes to global challenges like climate change, like health crisis, while raising as well its concerns over systematic human rights violations. And we think that only a united Europe will be able to respond to China's political agenda. And finally, the third point we would like to highlight is a debate on the children forcibly deported from Ukraine. This will take place as well on Wednesday. We must say that, we know it, but we must say that deporting children is a war crime, and this is another crime we have to add to the long list of war crimes committed by the Russian President Vladimir Putin and his allies. According to the European Commission's official documents, more than 16,000 children are believed to have been deported, with only 300 returned so far. So our question is, where are the rest? And this is a question we'll put in the plenary debate next week. And of course, on another note, we welcome the joint initiative of the European Commission and the Polish government to ensure Ukrainian children deported to Russian-controlled territory are returned. But we think, and figures say, we have to do a greater effort to achieve that. Voici donc nos priorités pour la prochaine session plénière, et seulement vous dire que notre président Stéphane Séjourné fera sa conférence de presse mardi prochain à 11h, et comme toujours, mon équipe et moi serons à Strasbourg. Alors, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à nous les poser. Merci.
Thank you, Clara. Alice Johnson for the Greens.
Thanks, Delphine. Now I'm very much worried that I'm going to take the longest out of everyone this week. It's a very big week for the Green Deal stuff next week, of course, with the Fit 55 package. With the introduction of CBAM, the EU has agreed to end free pollution permits, as importers will pay a pollution price. EU industry can no longer claim discounts on the EU ETS price, which will encourage third countries' industries to decarbonise and help contribute to the Paris goals. However, the Greens EFA Group will continue to push for an increase in financial support for poorer countries, which do not need to bear the historic responsibility for the climate crisis and shouldn't be unfairly hit by the EU's external carbon price. The reform of the carbon market will also incentivise energy and industrial sectors to fully decarbonise. We had pushed for a more ambitious phase-out of free CO2 certificates. However, this will now stand at the annual number of certificates will be gradually reduced to 0 by 2040. In return, industries that modernize and transform will get more support through the increased Innovation Fund and Modernization Fund. And last but not least, of course, the Social Climate Fund will mitigate the social impacts of this new carbon market on vulnerable households. And our group fought very hard to ensure that member states will have to prioritize low-income households when deciding how to use the remaining revenues generated by the ETS, which could be as much as 210 billion euros over the period. Our MEPs on these files are Yannick Jadot on the CBAM, Michael Bloss on ETS, and on the Social Climate Fund, Sarah Mathieu and Catherine Langensiepen. We're also looking forward to the debate on Wednesday on forever chemicals. Europe and the world is widely contaminated by PFAS, and I'm not going to even try and pronounce the full version of that scientific word. PFAS are persistent synthetic chemicals that can severely affect people's health and the environment. In January or February, I forget now, but The Guardian, Connect, Le Monde, and a bunch of other journalists came together and reported that 1,700 sites across Europe are widely contaminated by these forever chemicals, and Belgium is the highest polluted country with PFAS in Europe. There is the people living in a 10k radius outside a 3M factory in Flanders have been advised not to eat vegetables growing up their own gardens because of the pollution from these chemicals, which is of course not very great. So the widespread contamination is a failure of EU chemical legislation. While a proposal has been put forward in the context of REACH, some of these reforms could be adopted, if adopted, could only become applicable in up to 15 years, which is too long for us to wait to tackle the problem of PFAS. This stuff is in everything from frying pans to dental floss and waterproof jackets, and we cannot wait 15 years to tackle the problem. Our MEPs are Marie Toussaint and Jutta Paulus. Deforestation, we're looking forward to the vote on an end to imported deforestation, where EU consumers can end up funding deforestation in third countries. On Wednesday, the Parliament will vote for the outcome of trilogue negotiations on this file, which will require companies to guarantee that certain commodities and products sold in Europe are not linked to deforestation. It's the first law of its kind globally, and as Delphine mentioned earlier, it covers soy, beef, cocoa, other things like that. This is a major step forward in the fight against environmental destruction caused by EU consumption, and we welcome this file. Our MEP is Marie Toussaint, again. And the urgency of the climate crisis is kind of the theme of this week, which is also why we called for the debate on the recent IPCC report, which calls for rapid action if we're to keep temperature rises under 1.5, and the IPCC said we're already at 1.1 degrees of temperature rises, which is quite worrying. And again, on climate, we also called for this debate on Dieselgate. To tackle the climate crisis, we need to tackle the causes of global warming, including the sheer volume of diesel cars on our roads. 3 weeks ago, the International Council on Clean Transportation found that 77% of Euro 6 cars and 85% of Euro 5 cars have suspicious test results, which may indicate the existence of cheat devices, as was initially discovered with Dieselgate. That's why we've called for this debate and will continue to fight against emissions cheating. We also very much welcome and called for the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising next week for the 80th anniversary. And then on other files, we're looking for the debate on China, but Jan went into that in depth. And the crypto files, of course, where Ernesto Utterson is the co-rapporteur on the TFR file. These crypto files will help protect investors and reduce AML risks in the crypto sphere. Our press briefing next week with our co-presidents Terry Ranker and Philippe Lamberts will be on Tuesday at 10:30. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, it's a packed plenary. Michael Strauss for ACR.
Thank you very much, Delphine. A very good morning, everyone. As you can see, the ECR group has moved up in order of speakers. We've grown by 2 MEPs from the Finns party this week. Toivo Hakkarainen and Pirkko Ruohonen-Lerner, who will replace Laura Huhtasaari, having moved to the Finnish parliament after an impressive election success, decided to return to the ECR group. Once the integration of the 2 new members is formalized, expected on Wednesday, the ECR group will consist of 66 MEPs from 16 countries now. It shows that our political family is growing and that a conservative and constructive course, avoiding extremism and seeking a reasonable democratic balance within the Union, is right. We are convinced that the Finns will make a decisive contribution to our work. Now to the agenda. There are 4 points to highlight. Of course, we must talk about the Fit for 55 package, where some progress has been achieved, that's true, since their last appearance, some of which we can now support. The agreement on the ETS reform, for example, includes several key points for the ECR, such as a slower and more realistic phase-out of free allowances for industry, and that's what we like. Negotiators also found a balanced compromise on the maritime sector in the ETS, with a gradual phase-in until 2026. We are a bit less happy with the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, especially with the expected higher costs for companies and covered sectors, which will ultimately be passed on to consumers and may make our export industries less competitive. Then we welcome in principle the EU Social Climate Fund to help vulnerable households and micro-enterprises affected by energy and transport poverty, but we cannot agree with the introduction of further EU resources to finance the fund. Apart from that, we are most critical of and cannot support the revision of the EU ETS for aviation. We expect that the regulation will have a significant negative impact on consumers and thus on economic activity that depends on mobility. The second point I'd like to highlight is the report by the 2 co-rapporteurs, Asita Kanko from the ECR and Ernest Urtasun from the Greens, as already mentioned. It will be debated on Wednesday afternoon, and shortly it will make cryptocurrencies hopefully crime-proof. In short, as the use of crypto assets grows, it is necessary to extend the existing so-called travel rule that requires a set of personal account information when crypto assets are transferred. The text supports the removal of the current threshold of 1,000 euros, as such a threshold is meaningless in the crypto world. It is extremely easy to split big transfers into smaller ones using multiple wallet addresses. Many darknet activities involve smaller sums of money. Criminals and terrorists also use small sums to evade detection. We think the new precautions proposed are an important step forward in treating crypto as a normal sector of the economy. It will become safer to use cryptocurrencies for its citizens and more difficult for criminals and terrorists. Thirdly, in the key debate on Wednesday morning, we will point out that the forced deportation of children from Ukraine, as carried out by the Putin regime, cannot be tolerated by the international community. But the list of atrocities committed by the Russian Federation is much longer. Mass killings of civilians, shellings of homes and neighborhoods, and the cruel murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war all show Russia's true face. It is clear, and it cannot be repeated enough, that the only way to stop Russia's heinous atrocities and end the suffering of the Ukrainian people is for Ukraine to win this war. And fourthly, on Wednesday morning, we will declare that the EU needs a coherent approach to China that is not distorted by its divisive tactics. We must aim at a gradual disengagement from China while strengthening our ties with democratic Taiwan. Europe should not weaken transatlantic cooperation in favor of greater so-called strategic autonomy. On the contrary, we will be stronger if we continue to invest in our unity with the US, Canada and the United Kingdom. And that brings me to an end. Thank you very much. See you in Strasbourg and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. Tobias Teuscher for the ID Group.
Bonjour. C'est pour la fin. Donc Tobias Teuscher pour le groupe ID. Commençons lundi. Fit for 55, le rapport sur les impôts sur les importations. Évidemment, c'est une mesure que nous ne soutenons pas. L'Union tente de corriger le tir de délocalisation subi maintenant avec des nouveaux impôts. En fait, si l'on parle gentiment de taxe carbone, c'est en fait une erreur de framing. C'est un framing mal choisi parce qu'il s'agit en effet de quelque chose qui va alourdir l'économie alourdir la consommation. C'est une nouvelle taxe et ça ne va pas aider à décoller avec l'économie. Mais nous savons aussi, et je cite Strauss, pas Michael Strauss, Franz Josef Strauss, qui disait que les idées farfelues des écologistes naissent dans les quartiers des riches. Et c'est ainsi ici aussi. Et c'est pour ça, dans le même paquet, nous devons discuter comment traiter des conséquences sociales des travailleurs qui font subir des délocalisations et la perte de l'emploi. Chercher l'erreur. De même pour le Kosovo, avant Pâques, à propos Pâques, j'espère que vous avez eu de bonnes vacances, un bon repos, et vous avez compris que le seul vendredi noir, Black Friday, ce n'est pas quand MediaMarkt et Amazon baissent les prix, mais bien le vendredi saint. Donc avant Pâques, nous avons adopté des règles pour améliorer la lutte contre le blanchiment d'argent et le financement du terrorisme. Maintenant, nous ouvrons les frontières pour le Kosovo. Cherchez l'erreur. Donc, on sait que l'on a une région à côté de l'Union européenne qui est connue pour créer des problèmes de financement de terrorisme, de blanchiment d'argent, et en même temps, nous ouvrons les frontières parce qu'on abolit l'obligation de visa. De même, pour les cryptoactifs, nous partageons la position du groupe ECR. Ce n'est pas un bon pas dans la bonne direction. L'Union européenne montre en fait son hostilité à la fintech et les pays du Golfe vont en profiter. Et pour finir en beauté, une proposition très concrète sur la réforestation. Le rapport, je l'ai lu hier soir et je me suis dit, si on fait tellement de bonnes propositions, peut-être il faut agir concrètement. Et je me suis dit, puisqu'au mois de juin, nous avons l'événement pour la jeunesse, le European Youth Event, peut-être on peut faire un public-private partnership et on demande aux pépinières de l'Europe de nous fournir pour combien? 3 000 personnes? 10 000 jeunes. Bon, alors je lance un appel pour les pépinières de l'Europe de fournir à Strasbourg pour l'événement de la jeunesse 10 000 petits arbres, mais petits comme ça que ça rentre dans le bagage à main, parce que les jeunes très écologistes, ils vont tous venir en avion à Strasbourg, probablement, mais quand même que très pratiquement pour la réforestation, nous avons 10 000 arbres à Strasbourg et chaque jeune repart et peut planter son arbre chez lui. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Tobias. Et pour terminer, Lorelai Mihaila pour le Left Group.
Je peux vous l'offrir.
Ah, formidable. Merci.
Pour votre jardin, j'espère que vous en avez.
Oui, voilà. Très bien.
Thank you, Delphine. This plenary is dominated by environmental issues, and our priorities make no exception. I will speak as well about deforestation, but I don't have a tree with me. Worldwide, an area larger than the EU was lost to deforestation in just 30 years, according to the United Nations, and the EU consumption caused around 10% of this loss. For years, we have been calling for strong deforestation regulation, and during this plenary, the MEPs will finally vote on this. Concretely, the new law will make sure that companies will be obliged to sell in Europe only products that are deforestation-free. We heard this, but also the firms will also have to make sure that human rights and the rights of indigenous people are respected during the production process. This is a requirement that we pushed for. Our shadow, Katerina Konechna, is convinced that this regulation is historic and that it will make a big contribution to halting and reversing biodiversity loss. The debate for the deforestation regulation is on Monday and the vote on Wednesday. The world is on the brink of catastrophic warming. We keep hearing it, and yet we don't do enough to prevent it. The recent UN report on climate change published just a few weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, IPCC, warns that the world is likely to pass a dangerous temperature threshold within the next 10 years. Beyond this, climate disasters will be so extreme that people won't be able to adapt. The IPCC report will be debated on Thursday in a Commission statement. But despite the alarming language, the report offers some hope. We have the knowledge and the tools to fight climate change, it says. We just need to implement it. It is, of course, a necessary step to have this report debated, but words are not enough. We need EU action, and the IPCC report says it clearly what we kept calling on. We need to transform our economies and immediately transition away from fossil fuels and cut emissions. Our press briefing in Strasbourg with co-presidents Manon Aubry and Martin Schirdewan is on Tuesday at 11:30. You can find our plenary focus at the back of the room, and as always, do reach out to me and my colleagues if you have any questions. Thank you, and see you in Strasbourg.
Thanks a lot. I see there is a question online, but I don't know if there is a question in the room first. Yes, can you introduce yourself, and your media, and who you are addressing your question to?
To you, Tony.
Oh, great.
It's Andy Bounds at the Financial Times. I just want to check I heard right. You said that Bettel and Metzeler would give a press conference at 10:20 ahead of the debate at 10:30.
Well, it's a press point, I mentioned. Press point.
Nothing afterwards?
At the moment, there's nothing else is scheduled, no.
Okay, thank you.
Then I have someone online, I think Frédéric Simon, or Simon Frédéric, can you press your speak button? Are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks for giving me the floor. This is Frédéric Simon from Euractiv. I have a question for the ECR spokesperson. I'm wondering how the vote on the ETS and CBAM will happen for the ECR group. I understand, but maybe you can confirm that your group will vote in favor of both CBAM and the ETS reform. So please, can you confirm this? And also for the ID and Left group, I'd like to know how these two groups intend to vote on the ETS. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with Michael Strasser, ECR, then Tobias Teuscher and Lorelei.
So for ETS, it's a plus. CBAM is an abstention.
Okay, that's clear. Tobias, for the ID group?
Oui, bonjour. Non, je vous vois plus.
No, he was online, but he's listening to us.
Ah, okay.
No problem.
Téléphonez-moi lundi après-midi, je vous le dirai. On a notre réunion préparatoire lundi 15h et à ce moment-là, je peux vous le dire. Merci.
Voilà. Et pour Lorelei, pour le Left Group, Lorelei Mihala?
The Fit for 55 package to be voted this week in the European Parliament is still largely insufficient to meet our climate objectives and respect the Paris Agreement. We consider that the EU is still sticking to a market logic that leads to the big polluters continuing to pollute and the poorest to make the efforts and pay. But there are several files to be voted under Fit for 55 next week, so I can't offer a general comment on all the files. I'd be happy to come back to the journalist and provide specific answers.
I think he was interested in two files in particular, but you can see bilaterally with him when you have clarity on your position. I don't know if there is another question in the room. Yes, Lorenzo?
Lorenzo Consulas. Je voudrais demander un éclaircissement en fait pour ce qui a dit le porte-parole de ID. Il a dit que le CBAM va augmenter les délocalisations et les pertes d'emploi. Il me semble un peu contradictoire par rapport à l'objectif du CBAM qui est justement de lutter contre les délocalisations. C'est-à-dire si on impose aux produits qui sont importés les mêmes règles qui sont respectées dans l'Union européenne, ça décourage les délocalisations. Parce que si on délocalise dans des endroits où on ne peut pas importer en Europe, après, ça ne sert à rien. Donc, je voudrais comprendre quelle est la logique derrière la phrase que le CBAM va augmenter les délocalisations. Merci.
Tobias Teuscher for the ID Group. Do you want to react?
C'est très simple. Toute taxe supplémentaire, quel que soit, pour quelques produits, va être immédiatement répercuté sur le consommateur. Hein, et dans la première phase qui visait maintenant, ça me vient à l'esprit parce que la RTBF avait fait ce matin un très bon reportage, pas avant le mug du matin, sur la situation immobilière. Il était clairement dit que pour s'acheter ou pour construire une maison, les produits qui ne sont pas produits en Belgique elles-mêmes et qui doivent être importés sur le marché de la communauté sont plus chers. Et notamment parce que, non seulement à cause de l'inflation, mais aussi à cause des taxes qui sont imposées. Hein, donc toute taxe, quelle qu'elle soit, va alourdir la facture pour le consommateur. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut réfléchir quelle taxe est utile et laquelle ne l'est pas. Et en outre, les industries vont jamais... enfin, je veux dire, celui qui veut faire de l'argent, qui veut produire, qui veut faire du commerce, vont toujours aller là où ils ont les meilleures conditions. Et pour l'instant, la déindustrialisation forcée par Fit for 55 va conduire à une vie plus chère. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut réfléchir si ça fait sens. Merci.
Merci. Are there any other questions in the room or online? If it's not the case, I wish you a very good weekend, nearly, and I'll see you all in Strasbourg for the session. Don't hesitate to reach out to all the press officers from the political groups if you have additional questions. And don't forget about the newsletter that was issued and that can give you an outline of the other topics on the agenda. Thank you.